But part of that's where you've got to try, I mean, that's where we've got to try to peel away the layers of the onion, because you just don't, we don't have time to, and that's one thing I really talk to Emily. You know, if you find any particular area like that, talk to her and we'll add it to that list, because that's part of our job. But as we get into the data issues, that's got to be a part of this bigger team. So I've talked about the 2 areas. There's a third area. I mentioned there were 3 great challenges and 3 great opportunities, I felt. The third opportunity is what are challenges they refer to as 21st century student services. We have become more and more where we don't really provide, because we cannot provide the level of, I don't even say counseling, because we used to do counseling, which was more like interpersonal, you know, when students had problems and issues. We moved away from that a long time ago. We can't do counseling. We even struggle now to do really rich academic advising. Our student services, because of just the level of volume and our bandwidth in terms of resource and people, has moved more to just process registration. And that becomes one of the reasons why you got to kind of limit choices in some ways for students, because we got a lot of sideways motion that's going along at community colleges, but not a lot of forward motion sometimes. So we're never going to have a doubling or tripling of the numbers of counselors we have. So how do we use technology to help address those things? That was one of the things the committee looked at. So a couple of things that came out with that. One very technology specific, and this is an opportunity for us. Now, you know, we are a system that uses a common shared technology in terms of, and don't everybody moan when I say this, but we've worked hard on this. We've put huge investment in the college information system, our data tel system. I look at Sandra because she's lived and she didn't start it, but she came in and helped clean and move that forward and getting us to where we are. We are now, I think, the largest customer for data tel. Now, some people assume that gives us more leverage than anybody else. It actually makes you a little more vulnerable than anybody else, because what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? Now, here's the opportunity, if you will. And it's not about moving, but it's how do we push and move and work with data tel to perhaps move us forward to, you know, I think, you know, where are our students going? You know, it's just like when my son said about the email. They don't use computers. You know, they use things in their hands now. And so they're moving to, and that's where data tel portal's going. But where the technology I don't see going is, it seems like in our technology student support services, is we need more GPS type support for students. And that's not the term that they used in Innovative Ideas, and if I had my notes I could pull out that term, but that's the way I interpret it, as GPS. I want to go here I am, what's the shortest route for me to get there? Now, some of the folks who use data tel, well, actually there's a group that we're working with, and this is where I see a couple opportunities on the 21st century student services. We do a lot of work now with Community College Research Center out of Columbia University, CCRC. And CCRC started working recently through some research with Shauna Jaggers. They were wanting to look at the uses of technology, I think, in the context of how do you support the level of student services. And so they started working with Macomb Community College in Michigan, looking at the utilization of, I think it's Web Advisor as a tool in that regard. And so the research started, and then they said, wow, this stinks. I mean, Web Advisor's terrible is essentially what they said, because Web Advisor never was really created as a student GPS tool. It was created as a tool for advisors. But even that, they said, as a tool for advisors, this kind of stinks. So it prompted a conversation and work that, you know, and we're part of working with them, CCRC and data tel, and Macomb Community College, and Montgomery Community College from Philadelphia, which is another big data tel user, and our system to think about, okay, how do can we work with them to develop some more student, you know, those types of student support services technology through data tel. There's also something that we're working with now this is not as much technology but is using bandwidth, if you will, in terms of aggregation. One of the things with student support service that's been talked about is how do we address financial aid? If you look at the lines at your financial aid offices right now, they go around the block. I mean, people are just processing information. There are lots of questions that if you're a student counselor or a student financial aid, you end up answering lots of questions that shouldn't be someone standing in a line walking into somebody's office to find out, when the FAFSA is due or whatever it may be. They're the things that need to be aggregated, and there are ways to accomplish those kinds of opportunities. So one of the things the group talked about is, are there ways for us to aggregate, if you will, and provide opportunities for colleges to band together and use technology to support those kinds of questions, those kinds of inquiries that come in, not because we're going to be eliminating any student service jobs, but maybe we can get our student service folks actually they won't have the lines where they're having to deal with that. How can we use, in North Carolina, we have CFNC, which is a huge opportunity for us that others don't have in other states. So other states have done this. How can we use those tools to be able to remove some of the process work and take that off the plate so the focus can become on richer advising? That's the focus area. How can we use DataTel and other opportunities in that regard? So 3 great areas of focus and opportunity, it seems to me, is the data piece and SAS helping us with that. What we're doing with learning technologies, what we're already doing in that regard, but how do we pull that together and how do we focus perhaps on maybe fewer courses, but a deeper focus. And then the third area being more this notion of 21st century student support.
I thought you hit on something that really clicked for me, because as technology has evolved and we've adapted technology as our tool to help us do whatever it is that we're doing, but it is sort of a shift from us adapting it to our needs to us adapting it to the student needs. It is a paradigm shift, really, because as technology is advancing, we really look at more customized learning and customized services for students. Then we have to look at the technology in a different way, because that is all of a sudden our focus when we're sort of over here on our tasks and the things like, that keep us busy with our jobs. But if we really focus on the student and how the technology can help us with the student.
I think there's opportunities for us to get really creative in how we do some of these things. And I don't think we should be afraid of changing the paradigms of what we do too much.
I think one of the things that comes to mind with me is the learning objects that we're developing out here are just fantastic. But getting faculty to get over the fear of using that type of object in their courses, that fear of turning loose of ownership of everything that they create,
right,
and
knowing how, knowing it's even out there, how to access it. And one of the challenges too for everybody, whether you're a counselor or you're dealing with technology or you're a teacher, it's tough to fly the plane and change out a part simultaneously. So, we have to figure out how to make things easier, more seamless. That's why we can't say, well, we got this here, that there, and this in another place and expect everybody's going. I mean, once it becomes too difficult to find and too difficult to integrate, it may be wonderful. It may be the best learning object that's out there, but nobody's going to use it.
One of the things that Mr. Kim said in the presentation today, I think that was really innovative, and taking a risk is something we're going to have to do too. When Central Piedmont shipped all their email to the Google and was willing to open the door, so to speak, we've got to be willing to look at this technology that's already out there and not try to control it, so to speak. And that's what he was talking about. And it certainly it's a good model to look at.
Now no, you say that, but we're going to have to pay attention to some of the risks as well. And I'll tell you, that's why, as we look at the COLT environment and the COLT world, we're going to need to also, I think, Here's the way I would go about this, and you tell me if this causes too much heartburn, but instead of having COLT, instead of having innovative ideas, now that we've kind of evolved to this place, I'd still have a COLT role around learning technology policy, but for at least a couple of years, I'd like to put real focus on those three areas, those three opportunities of challenge and opportunity. The data challenge, the analysis challenge, the SAS opportunity. The how do we bring together all our teaching tools and how do we focus our distance education opportunities and the other technologies in a deeper way. I'm also fascinated by what can be done in healthcare with simulation technologies right now. That's something we've got to get ahead of. And then the third area, and so I almost like to have three different groups of folks helping us to really focus and move forward, and the third area being this whole student support piece. How do we remove some of the process requirements from our student support folks through aggregation of opportunity? How can we engage Datatel in our work with CCRC and others and moving that forward? So those are the three big opportunities. But the fourth area, I think you got to have we got to maintain an area is going to be this issue of distance learning policy, and it's got to have this balance of how do we allow for the creativity and not everything has to fit in the boxes as neatly, but on the other hand, we can't get so burned. And I'll tell you, there's something going on right now that I heard about 2 weeks ago that's probably going to rock. It has the potential to rock everybody's world. There is some real concern. The president of AACC talked to me about that. I don't know if you know about the inspector generals from the Department of Education. There's a real concern about distance ed fraud that's going on right now. It started with the for-profits, and then within the last month or so, they are really going deep into community college campuses because apparently they're very organized rings around the United States where, it's essentially, it sounds like a Pell Grant fraud, where they're targeting community colleges, and places like us that have lower tuition are going to be even greater targets, and signing folks up for distance ed courses, collecting the Pell, people who really aren't students, and putting them into distance ed. And so we've got to, and there's a real concern among nationally and so anytime you get a big issue like that, that can put a lot of, we're going to need to watch and see what happens in that regard. And we have to pay attention to you all know this, we have to pay attention to our quality issues. One of the things I've always felt is I felt like there was a greater variance in quality in distance education, that you either saw much greater teaching opportunity, but I also saw some of the worst I've ever seen. One time we fired the teacher of the year one year at my college because just some issues came up where we started looking at their distance ed classes. They weren't doing anything. And time after time, and I think in many ways we've tried to control those things. We've tried to make sure, but there is a greater opportunity for not doing what you need to do instructionally in distance ed, just as I think there's a greater opportunity when you use technology to take teaching to a whole nother level. And so that variance requires us to pay very close attention to policy in a way that doesn't in any way lock down innovation and creativity, but doesn't let fraud take place. That's the big challenge.